As we reach the end of the NBN volume build, what comes next?
And what's in the future of 5G pricing?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the weekly podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the tech news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined by Adam Turner, a man who's stuck back in lockdown because he basically lost the postcode lottery.
Oh man, don't even start me. I'm not happy because I really don't think my suburb should have got dragged into this. It's one of those things where one postcode covers several suburbs, and here I am, bam, stuck in lockdown again. But at least it gives me another 4 weeks to work on my Donkey Kong high scores.
There's a line from The Castle that comes to mind, and I'll leave it at that. We're also joined in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by Gizmodo editor Tegan Jones. Tegan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Later on, we're going to talk everything that's happening in the world of 5G, but first, we turn our attention to the world of mostly fixed line broadband, with a hot serve of our soup du jour, the NBN. It's July 2020, which means the NBN rollout should be done and dusted. And it is, as long as you don't count the 100,000 odd homes dumped in the too hard basket. Earlier on in the week, we caught up with Phil Britt, a veteran of the Australian broadband industry and managing director of our podcast sponsor, Aussie Broadband, to talk about the NBN reaching the end of the volume build and what comes next.
Hi, Phil. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys.
So we've reached the end of the NBN volume build. What exactly does that mean, and what comes next?
Look, I guess the way I'd describe it is they've gotten to the end of the main build, and all that's left is pretty much the hard stuff. So they're the premises that they haven't been able to connect along the way, and so there's still more work to go. But they're done with all the. I wouldn't use the term easy, but they're done with all the main build.
And that's about 100,000 that are still left.
Yeah, that's roughly the figure that we're hearing, and that'll take some time to work through because there's lots of like civil construction issues or building access issues that they've got to work through. So their approach the first time around was to just whack in as much as they could as quick as they could. And then now they have to go back and deal with all the things that they've avoided along the way.
Yeah. I know one of our longtime listeners, Jason from Warrigal, sent us a tweet saying he's still listening via 4G at home because he can't even get DSL, let alone NBN. And they've just come through in the last couple of days and said, yeah, you can sign up. But a lot of people have been pushed back now to September and beyond. So it does look like some people are going to be waiting till at least Christmas, if not into next year.
Yeah, there's lots of little pockets that are like that. We've got a core business client of ours that has their home in Toorak, and it keeps getting pushed out by months, sort of thing. So there's lots of these little pockets around where there's been some little shortfall that they need to work around.
Well, it's nice to know it's happened to Toorak as well. So they're not picking on people by income level. It doesn't matter where you are; everyone's equal. You just may happen to miss out.
No, that's the thing. And look, a lot of even NBN senior execs have only just actually got on to the NBN in the last month or so because they live in sort of inner Melbourne, inner Sydney kind of things, and they've been the last areas that have been rolled out.
With that in mind, their rollout pace, was picking up, and obviously this year's been a little bit different. But do you have a gut feel of how long it might take them to hit that point?
Look, it's pretty hard to say, but I think it'll be at least another 12 months to work through those last premises. That they're going to require quite a bit of project management and dealing with that. But it's anyone's guess at the moment how long it's going to be.
And with the NBN reaching this kind of semi-complete state, I guess it also changes the conversation we have around people switching to the NBN to people being on the NBN already. As an ISP in a competitive space, how do you approach that kind of change?
Look, we've already been sort of dealing with that to a degree. Like around about 55% of our customers each month come in via swapping from other RSPs. So the churn in, as we call it, is certainly alive and well in this market. And as what we call the land grab, which is the people that are forced to connect, start to happen or start to die off, that churn is going to be more important for providers like us to keep building our base, because we're 100% driven off organic growth. We don't go around and buy up other companies and that. We just rely on people hearing about us and swapping because they like the service.
So, how much of that new traffic would you say are people coming in because you're offering some faster plans that are above 100 meg? And how much of it are just because people are looking to change from their existing telco for some other reason?
Look, the percentages haven't shifted a great deal over the last few months since we introduced the high speed plans. That it's certainly typically when we see people churn in, it is because they want 100 meg or above. But when we released the gig 50 and the 250 25 plans about a month ago, we did see quite a churn in event around that, and there's now about 2% of our base that are actually on those plans, so around about 5,000 customers, which we were surprised at. The guys in the network team sort of said, "Oh, how big do you think this is going to be so we can dimension for it?" I said, "Oh, I reckon we might get 500 or 1,000 customers," and we had done that within the first sort of few hours, and everyone was going, there's actually a lot more demand here for high speed than what people realise.
So, how do you actually handle your provisioning of that? Now, I say that as someone, I'm on one of your 250 plans, and I've noticed I often peak above, what you promise you're going to give me, which is quite nice, obviously, but presumably there's a balancing act there.
Look, there is a balancing act, and I guess there's a little bit of an artificial benefit at the moment because NBN is providing additional CVC bandwidth due to COVID. We've got a lot of extra headroom in the network, and when we released those plans, we made it fairly clear that during peak times, speed may vary. And it will be greater than sort of the 200 meg plans. But if you're in the gig, like people at the moment are getting gig speed tests all through the peak and are happy as Larry. But I think once that CVC steps back as part of the COVID relief, it'll come back. The way we manage bandwidth is through, I guess, a dynamic provisioning tool we call CVC bot, and it watches the traffic levels in real time and will adjust the bandwidth in real time. So, say for example, there's a new game update that's coming out that we don't know about. It'll see the traffic rise and it will start to increase the CVCs automatically in sort of 15-minute increments.
We sort of joked about that actually on a recent episode about Call of Duty updates. Are they really that significant? Like, do you genuinely see them coming through the network and realize, right, prepare for the tsunami?
Oh, absolutely, we do. And there's one due to hit again today. And basically, we see around about a 20 to 25% increase in total network load when a Call of Duty update comes out. They are just there's a lot of players and they're very big updates.
So it's interesting that Paul Fletcher's been talking this week about what might happen next with the NBN, and he said that future upgrades will depend on customer demand. So, do you think that the kind of demand that you're seeing for faster than 100 meg plans bodes well for whether we might get upgrades to the NBN so more people can access those kind of plans?
Look, I think that's part of it, but I think it probably translates to customers willing to pay for upgrades, is probably the underlying message there. It's certainly they're moving to more a model where you pay a few $1,000s for a technology swap, and that's probably how the upgrades will occur. I think the other clear message he's putting across is that I guess the free part of the NBN is done and dusted. If you want more than what you've got today, then it's going to be some sort of paid upgrade.
So you don't think that upgrades in the future would focus on trying to bring up the people on the lowest fiber to the node plans that maybe are struggling to even get 50?
Look, I think there will be some of that go on, but I think it'll be to get them to a point where if they can't get sort of 50 and a little bit more, then yes, they'll probably get an upgrade path, and I think that'll probably be FTTC, which is running really well, but still those plans aren't available there today, even though the technology in theory will support it. But if you're already on FTTN and you're getting in the sort of 80s plus kind of realm, I think it's going to be a case, and this is just speculation at the end of the day, but it's going to be some sort of paid upgrade.
Yeah. Do you think we'll see then a change in the way they price those paid upgrades? Because it's been one of those big sticking points with consumers. A lot of people have said, "Oh, I'd like to do the technology choice. I'm fiber to the curb, but but they've quoted me $20,000 or something fairly outrageous." Do you think we'll see a bit more? well, not competition, but a slightly friendlier prices to convince people that that's a good deal?
Look, I think in the case of FTTC, it should be certainly a lot lower than what's been quoted, because literally the fibre is sitting at your outside your front door almost. It's just getting that last bit in. And it should probably be, I don't know, less than $3,000 to bring that in. Um, but the ones that are on fibre to the node, that are say 500 metres from the node, there is more work involved, but it still shouldn't be these 50, 60 grand kind of bills that we're seeing people get quoted. It's just not realistic, and I think if it had a more commercial front around it, then those prices should be a lot lower.
So now that we've reached the end of the volume build and we can kind of see what's left, what are the big issues facing the NBN going forward? From, I mean, I know there's a lot of different ways to look at that, but from an infrastructure perspective.
Look, I see the big issue is actually around the CVC side of thing, this artificial constraint or construct that is in the pricing model. And we're seeing bandwidth, or customers' demand for bandwidth, increase 25% year on year. But the inclusions that NBN puts in their plans, or the amount of included CVC, isn't keeping up with that level of growth. And so this is going to create a real margin squeeze for RSPs. And the danger becomes either they have to solve it commercially, which means that we see peak time congestion start to kick back in. So step back to, say, 2 years ago. That's not going to be very palatable for the consumer base. And so, and certainly RSPs like us that always provide the right speeds certainly don't want to go down that path. But the margins involved in these services are so slim that there's basically not much room for error. And so I see the biggest issue with the NBN is still around that CVC construct, and either wiping it away altogether, which would certainly be our strong preference, but in the absence of doing that, basically increasing the inclusions.
Well, we know with CVC, the COVID-19 boost that you mentioned earlier, that's due to expire at this point on the 19th of August. Does that mean consumers should worry that come the 19th of August, suddenly general NBN connections are going to downgrade because obviously providers can't afford to just say, "Oh, we'll take a 40% cut to our own revenues."
Well, and we've pulled some data today because we're working on this. Traffic levels are still over 10% above what we would expect to see them at this point in time. And so, to put it in perspective, our overage bill, or our excess CVC bill today, is $500,000 a month. We're expecting that to grow to probably about $900,000 by September. And that's a pretty big hit. And even for a provider that's at our scale with 250,000 customers kind of thing, there's just not the margins in everything else. And so the NBN bandwidth is the most expensive bandwidth we buy anywhere in the network. Everything else is in the sort of cents per megabit kind of realm. This is $8 a megabit for excess. And it's either going to translate to providers basically solving it commercially, or having to do other creative ways of doing it.
All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the next couple of months. Phil, thank you very much for your time.
No worries. Thanks very much for the opportunity, guys.
So, with it being July, it's also come time for Telstra to start charging extra for 5G. Because when it launched 5G a year ago, it said everyone can have it for free. Yay! But after a year, if you want it, if you're not on the top 2 tier plans, you'll have to give us $15 a month more. But Tegan, that's not exactly what's actually happened, is it?
No. So just this week, Telstra refreshed all of its plans again. So essentially, what's happened is that the small, medium, and large plans have all gone up by $5. The extra large plan has gone up by $15. This is all postpaid, of course. And now the medium plans will also get 5G thrown in for free. But a really weird thing is going on with the small plans because, according to Telstra, a small number of their customers on those small plans do have 5G handsets. And instead of charging the $15 bolt on that was the original plan, they are going to be migrating those customers onto the medium plan. So essentially making them go up a price tier. Now, they're going to sweeten the pot on that by offering a rebate that basically just gives them back the difference between those two plans for the first 12 months. But, after that, they are on a higher plan and paying for it.
And that's only if you're already one of those small customers. You can't come along and say, "Oh, I want a small plan, but I want 5G. Give me the rebate," can you?
No, I believe not. Look, the thing about this, it's been so complicated because even though a year ago, they went from something like 1,400 plans down to, roughly 20 across business and consumer, there's still so many, grandfather plans and things like that, that it is still actually quite messy and difficult to work out some of those nuanced questions like that. And we haven't gotten answers on all of them yet. So, look, I would assume that if you want to go onto the small plan at a later date, but also want 5G, you might not be able to. Like, as far as I can tell, they're not doing the bolt on anymore.
It doesn't. Yeah, it certainly. If you look at their site, it doesn't seem to exist. You mentioned
Yeah.
grandfathering though, because they're also doing something new there. Previously, if you
Yeah.
were a Telstra customer, you could generally stay on an old plan as long as you wanted to. After a certain period of time, it really didn't make much sense, but some people still did. But they've actually said, "Yeah, look, Granddad's actually getting taken out to the barn with a shotgun."
Yeah, pretty much. So again, a bit of a weird one to explain, but essentially, Telstra is giving customers sort of on these grandfathered plans, and obviously also this small to medium 5G one as well, just to complicate things. Essentially, they're giving them 3 months to move on to the equivalent new plan. And they will, and that's only the people that are on these newer Telstra ones, by the way. So they'll give them 3 months to move over, and if they do, they'll get the rebate, and they'll also get all of the extra data that also is being attached to these new plans. If they don't move over manually by September 30, they will be moved over by force, essentially, and they won't get the rebate. But then you've also got people on the very old plans that you're talking about who just will need to move over onto what the closest equivalent plan is. I've been hearing colloquially from some customers that they're actually not ending up in a better space. So basically, a lot of the people that were on last year's plans that might be paying a little bit extra now will at least get like a ton more data. But some people are on some pretty sweet older plans where now they're going to have to kind of pay more for nothing extra. So I know that's a really long explanation, but that's really how
It's a really
complicated this
complicated
is.
kind of story, though. It's
Yeah.
totally fine, and I think the really key thing there is Telstra's saying we're killing these grandfathered plans, and the new ones are generally a little bit more expensive. Yes, there's
Yes.
more data, but we want more of your cash.
Absolutely. And, in some very specific cases that I've heard, they weren't necessarily getting more data just because, maybe
Hmm.
they got a really good deal however long ago, whatever it happened to be. So it's all very complicated. And yeah, well, but I mean, and I guess the good news for Telstra is that if you take into account that apparently 4 million Australian customers of theirs are already on one of these last year plans, as we'll call them, at a minimum, they're going to be now getting an extra $5 a month. It's obviously more than that because the extra large plans get an extra $15, but at a minimum now, Telstra is going to end up having an extra $20 million of revenue per month thanks to these new plans.
So, Tegan, is this the way that we thought it would play out? Because I know when they first announced the we're gonna give it away for free and then charge $15, people said, "Yeah, right." We're sure that at the last minute they will change. You'll change your mind and do it a different way. Is this the way that you thought it would play out?
No, I thought that they would get rid of it in some way or bake it into a price hike. That's what I expected. And, theoretically, that's what's happened. What I did not expect was this grandfathering situation, and which is what's really, I think, actually upsetting people. I don't really think
Mm.
people care that much about the 5G issue comparatively, but this idea that last year the narrative around these new simplified plans was no locking contracts. That's great for the consumer because you can move up and down as you please. You can even leave Telstra and you won't get pinged for it unless you have to pay out your phone if you've got one. But now it's like it's been turned on consumers' heads because if no lock-in contracts goes one way, now it's going the other way. No more grandfather plans.
Mm.
So it's not necessarily great news for consumers, especially if they are paying off an expensive handset. This idea that we never really know if maybe they can just hike prices up again, by $5 next year, that's a lot to some people. And the idea that, oh, well, you know what, if you don't like it, just simply leave, and they have to pay out what, $800, $1,000, $1,500 on an expensive handset. These are people that didn't buy outright for a reason because they
Yeah.
probably can't afford it. So it's really classist, in my opinion, and it does not leave a lot of room for the consumer.
Yeah, it's an interesting one in that 5G space because, as you say, it's kind of new. I don't know that there's so many people who would be absolutely passionate about it. Although,
I
having been
agree.
testing out their hotspot recently, they have at least expanded beyond that little blob of North Sydney that I think we were all testing in.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, but they are seeing some 5G competition. I mean, Optus this week said they're starting millimeter wave trials, and I guess that's the next phase where 5G and 5G differentiation might really start to make some value out of those 5G only plans.
Yeah, look, I think that it will in the coming years. I think that you're right. Right now, the throwing in the 5G on medium, large, and extra large plans isn't really like that much of a big deal. There's some people that are early adopters that are into it. But the problem that I've always had with this idea of charging extra for 5G is that, they're offering it for free for a year. Vodafone and Optus are doing roughly the same thing, not that they've put any kind of time limit on it. But, offering something for free when the handsets are relatively prohibitively expensive and, like as you said, we're still in the rollout phase, doesn't really mean much. So, either doing a bolt-on system or, putting up your prices at the point where it's actually more available is curious. And I wish it was more surprising.
How do you think the other telcos will respond? As you say, they haven't announced timelines for when their pricing will change, but how do you see it playing out over the next year or two?
Yeah, that's interesting because Optus has always maintained, like, they've kept it pretty open. They always said that, maybe we'll have to at some point. Vodafone was the only telco when they announced the rollout of their 5G network at the end of last year that straight up said to myself on email that they would not charge extra for 5G. Now, a few weeks ago, they have now backflipped on that. Understandable reasons, right? You don't know what's going to happen with it. With millimeter wave, maybe it'll become more expensive. So now they've kind of gone more the Optus route and said that it would be fair to say that, they're not going to rule it out. But I think that a lot of the time, Telstra leads the way for a lot of this stuff. So I think that if Telstra never actually charges extra for 5G, I cannot see Vodafone or Optus being able to justify it.
Mm.
We've we've seen similar kind of moves in the past from the NVNO space, in that some of them have had like super cheap 3G only plans or 3G only plans with lots of data, that kind of thing. And obviously, it's all getting fed through from Telstra or Voda or Optus. How does I'm taking a slight devil's advocate position here, but how does that differ? Isn't Telstra just saying if you want the best, you've got to pay a bit more?
Yeah, I mean there is that, but I suppose it depends on what your definition of best is. I think that a lot of what Telstra had kind of been saying around this for the last year is that, not everyone wants 5G speeds or doesn't need 5G speeds, right? Like, not everyone needs that. Early adopters who want to pay for it will grab it, etc., etc. But I think it's really important to remember that 5G or any new network isn't just about speed. What it also offers is things like lower latency, making sure that more devices can connect to a network during peak periods and without dropouts, when you're on the train on the way to work, New Year's Eve, sporting events, that kind of thing. So I think, in my opinion, and this is where my strong opinions on democratizing connectivity and technology comes into it, that I don't think that, a government or a service provider should really be telling people, what they have a right to or not when it's, in my opinion, basic infrastructure. I get they're the ones paying for it, but while they are putting in all of the money for it, they're also going to get all the profits from it, including their price hike now, and any kind of lucrative government contracts, etc., that come from it. So I think that Australians have a fundamental right to good infrastructure and to have stuff that straight up works. It's not just about speed.
So keeping my Telstra devil's advocate hat on, because I don't entirely disagree with you, but keeping my devil's advocate hat on, I guess they could argue that, and they do actually. To be fair, I'm not
I'm
guessing
sure.
here at all. They would argue that having people jumping up onto 5G frees up spectrum for 4G customers, so it's a win-win for both. It's not necessarily a democratic issue if everyone has access on what they will state is the best network in Australia, TM.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but that's just them saying that, like, theoretically this would happen. I mean, I can also jump on your bandwagon and say that, that upgrading the towers also, shows that 4G networks improve as well. So, Telstra can certainly make that argument as well. And I'll hand that one to you in terms of that just being correct. I don't think it sets a good precedent, especially with everything that's happened with the NBN, that we're sitting there saying that it is reasonable for people to have to pay a minimum of $65 a month or 60, I believe, on prepaid. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, to, access what will be, the next basic infrastructure when it comes to mobile connectivity. I just don't think it sets a good precedent and I don't like it.
I'm honestly not sure what the 5G prepaid story is at this point in time. I don't know that Telstra's said a lot about it either.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. The main thing, well, the main event really has been about the postpaid. That is something that I had read, but I could be wrong. But essentially, there's nothing that's sub $60 right now. That's pretty much where it's at.
Yeah, for sure.
So thinking back to what we saw with the 4G rollout, what do you expect to see happen in terms of them making 5G available to their wholesale partners, prepaid, the other things when it's not quite so, such an exclusive, difficult thing to get? How do you think it will change in the next couple of years?
I'm actually entirely unsure. So I wasn't in the industry when 4G rolled out, so I don't have anything to compare it to. So that might be a good one for Alex to throw his predictions in as well. But that actually has been my question specifically around MVNOs, and I can't get anyone to answer my questions on that when it'll roll out to those partners. But I do think that once it does, that will probably help level the playing field a little bit. I mean, and it's one of those things too, right? Like as the years go by, it will get cheaper, it'll become normalized, and it's not really just about the telcos there either. Most of the handsets that are even capable of 5G are quite expensive. There's a handful of them now that are kind of sitting at that sub 1,000, between 600 and 1,000 mark. So it's getting there. But I do think it will take a few more years to make it a little bit more normalized, especially as we're waiting for it to actually roll out.
Now, Alex, if I remember correctly, Telstra really dragged their heels on making 4G available to their NVNO partners.
Yeah, look, largely yes. If
Yeah.
history is a guide, then Telstra was not quite the last because Vodafone was so slow to jump into 4G. But Vodafone
Slower
was
than
then
with
very
5G, may I ask?
sorry.
From memory? Slower than what they had been with 5G?
Oh
Because
yeah,
obviously,
way slower.
wow, okay,
By years slower.
wow.
Um, but Vodafone was very slow to market with 4G. But once it had it, it handed it over to its MVNO partners reasonably promptly.
Yeah.
Telstra was a very very different story, and for the longest time, as memory serves, and this is going back a few years, Boost had it a little earlier than most, and then its other MVNO partners, that are like your Woolworths Mobile and Aldi Mobile and so on, and bits of Southern, had 4G, but it was on the Telstra wholesale network, which, as they always say, is parts of the Telstra
Yeah.
network. Now, if you're in the capital cities, if you're in the big uh, regional areas, that's usually not a big drama. There are some more remote areas where you don't get coverage that way at all, but you've got to really look at your coverage maps pretty intently to get that. I don't know that Telstra will follow that course, though, with 5G, but I can't help but wonder as well, and I'm going to throw the question back in your direction, Tegan, how much of this actually matters right now when we're seeing situations like, for example, Adam, you're not really going to need 5G for the next month, certainly,
No.
because of your lockdown situation. But
Thanks
where
for
we're seeing a
reminding
lot
me.
more,
I was just starting to calm down.
look, I want you angry. It makes you more passionate. But where we're seeing so many more people working from home, staying from home, not traveling as much, not commuting as much where they can avoid it, does 5G matter as much?
No, I actually, for the most part, no. And I think that even if people were, we're still at a stage where it's rolling out. So I don't think it is as big a deal as other stuff that's come out in terms of the $5 and $15 price hikes and the grandfathering plans. I think those are the bigger deals out of what's come about this week. That being said, though, it will perhaps be quite important to people who are looking for alternatives to NBN for whatever reason. Perhaps they don't like it, or they straight up can't get it yet. So that's where things like those 5G home broadband hubs and things like that are quite important. So that will be perhaps something to think about and something that's important to those potential customers.
I guess there, Optus has sort of set a bit of a baseline, though, because they've gone in with an anti-NBN product, in effect.
That was kind of the messaging too, like even from last year. Yeah, they were not subtle about it. It was great.
But that puts pressure on Telstra for a home for when and if they do home broadband 5G, because right now they have 5G hotspots, of course, but they don't really specifically sell here's our 5G home solution. And every time you ask them, they kind of say, "Oh, it's something we might consider." But I suspect they're more considering working out whether or not their infrastructure arm can buy the NBN itself in a couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. So it's going to be interesting to see. But yeah, to answer your question, I think you're right. I think that it is less of an issue for them right now. And we'll just see how they actually handle it, particularly in terms of pricing when it does matter a little bit more in the future.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks for Tegan for making time for the show this week.
Thank you for having me on and letting me, kind of not quite yell, but be aggressive into a microphone.
It's what we're here for. And if folks want even more of your aggression, where can they get that?
Oh, they can definitely get that on Twitter. So my Twitter is Tegan_Writes, so TEGAN_WRITES, and you can read my stuff over at Gizmodo Australia.
And thanks also to Phil from Aussie Broadband. And of course, you can catch up with us on Twitter at VerticalHoldAU or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And as always, thanks everyone for listening. Try to stay home, try to stay safe, and send me a care package. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
I just have to remember to send bears in to poke you at appropriate approved points to get